Totally.
Well, if I'm recording it, then see, I know you, but
yeah, we have to kind of introduce ourselves again, don't we?
that's right. I don't introduce myself because by this time, I think most people watching my channel know a little something about me, but why don't you introduce yourself?
Sure. Yeah. So my name is Nathan. I just moved from Seattle to Spokane, Spokane's about 280 miles east of Seattle. I lived in Seattle for the last 6 years. I work as a registered nurse, and I just married my beautiful wife, who's a medical student over here in Spokane. So that's kind of what I'm up to. I went down the Jordan Peterson rabbit hole about probably 2 years ago or so, and I've been digging deeper ever since. And then I stumbled across Paul's channel at one point, and it seemed like a really natural fit because of my background. I have a bit of background in the church as well as specifically the Reformed Church and stuff. And so it seemed like someone I should reach out to.
Awesome. And so, Nathan and I have been getting to know each other a little bit. I run a little program called Sierra Leadership Network that Nathan jumped into. And so, So what do you have on your mind today, Nathan? I saw you on the list. I thought, wonder what Nathan wants to do. What's he got on his mind?
Well, I know when I first emailed you, I said something about, wanting to talk about, the real reason why non-Christians don't want to go to church. Particularly, college-educated non-Christians don't want to go to church. But after our conversation with our most recent SLN conversation, I kind of realized I really just wanted to talk about exactly what we talked about at SLN. Like what the vision for the church going forward and how it fits in with this Jordan Peterson phenomena. And I thought your video today, particularly with Tim Keller, was very salient to the conversation. So yeah, I think I sort of wrote out like a bunch of, I had this ongoing list. It's like 4 pages or something that I've written of like different questions and things I might want to talk about with Paul. And I'm looking at all of them and I'm like, now it's just the paradox of choice. I have like no idea which one to start with. Hey, on the bright side though, we save a lot of time here because I don't even have to show you my kitchen. You already saw it.
That's right. This is true.
Yeah, exactly.
So, well, why don't we start out with that main topic? I mean, What are your thoughts? Why? Now, I have, in a lot of ways, it's really hard for me to know a lot about this because there has not been a period in my life where I have not gone to church probably nearly 52 weeks a year. I go, when I was a foreign missionary, that was weirder because that was just a much different situation. But
right
in the United States, if church is open, I want to be there. I love church. And so is that the case for you? Is that how you've lived your life?
Well, for the most part, I think definitely like up until age 18, I was like 4 times a week, if not more, particularly in high school, I was really, really involved and I was pretty convinced that I had a call to ministry and stuff. And I was really involved with the youth group. I played on the youth band. I played on the worship band. I was the kid who wanted to be involved in everything and be the Jesus kid, and, but come age 18 and moving to college and stuff, it was not the case after that. I went to a Christian university, Seattle Pacific University, and it was certainly it was definitely a Christian university. I wasn't ashamed of its identity, but there was something about not having an automatic community of friends and family around that just made me not want to go, and every church that I encountered seemed to be like the purest instantiation of the stereotype of an overly conservative church or the purest instantiation of the stereotype of an overly progressive church. And it just, none of it attracted me at all. And further, on a practical sense, it's like I couldn't, with my class schedule, I was studying really hard for, trying to get into the nursing program within this university. And it just wasn't practical to be involved in any church on more than a once a week basis. And I don't like being involved in a church on only a once a week basis. That just doesn't feel like I'm actually part of the church,
Yep.
And so I probably spent almost the entirety of my time in Seattle not going to church anywhere consistently. And everything I just said about why I wasn't going to church, it's like I was telling myself that for the entirety of church until, I finally, I got married this summer and I moved to Spokane, and I looked, my wife and I looked at each other and we both kind of said it at the same time that like, we really need to get involved in a church once we move, if not just for practical purposes, like we need to meet people, we know nobody.
Yep.
And fast forward 3 months of consistent church attendance later, and I realized that the real reason I didn't want to go to church was because I guess internally I didn't consider it worth it to be interacting with people who I consider to be less intelligent than me, I guess, you know. And I kind of had this epiphany at I started my own Jordan Peterson meetup here in Spokane. And it was like 3 weeks ago or so, I was talking with two people who showed up, and they kind of said the same thing that a lot of, you know, Jordan Peterson folks say. And that's that, you know, I'm not a Christian and I didn't grow up in the church, but Jordan Peterson has really convinced me of the value of church. And I kind of want to go, but I don't feel like I've had the right experience, and I don't know how to get involved in it, and I don't understand what's going on. And I just kind of said, you know, it's funny because it was a great illustration of the fact that we're not transparent to ourselves, because I found myself saying, like, I realized that the real reason I didn't want to go to church was that I had disdain for people I considered less intelligent than me, you know? And then I was like, oh, that's the reason you didn't want to go to church. Oh, wow. So it's kind of like I'm telling another person this, and I'm telling myself that at the same time. So,
and then you realize that's I don't like people who think that way.
Oh, yeah. Yeah,
what an elitist I am.
Exactly. I mean, it really just made me cringe at myself. Like, really? Like, that's why you didn't want to go to church? Like, what an awful thing to actually think about people, you know?
Yeah.
And I mean, it's not as if, it's not as if all of a sudden my frustrations with, you know, certain things that go on in church, you know, vanishes overnight. Like just last week at Bible study, I think we wasted like 20 minutes with one of the members who really wanted to make the case that Halloween was the most evil thing in the world. And we just couldn't get him off of it. And it's like, oh my goodness, like, can we just move on? This is ridiculous. But my reaction in terms of like, really like not wanting to be around that person ever, and actually going out of my way to not be around those kinds of people at all. And like, they have no value to me whatsoever. They can't edify me whatsoever. Like, that's a bad mindset is what that is. Like, a really bad idea.
It's evil. Let's just call it. I mean, it is from the pit of hell, and it is inside of you. Welcome to Calvinism.
And so that realization just kind of clicked in my head. I'm like, church isn't for me. It's not for me at all. You know, I mean, it's for me and everyone else. You know, and so all levels of the hierarchy get to be equal at church. And there's value in like intentionally actually being around those people. I mean, that's the classic criticism that people have of like the, you know, the college educated progressives, is that they talk all day about the, you know, and I'm talking, you know, the far left progressives. I'm not talking like the moderates, but you know, they talk all about their compassion for the poor, but they absolutely cannot stand being around them. And so instead they just elect programs to help the poor so that they don't have to be around, you know. It's like, it's classic, but it's like, a little did I know that, you know, I was embodying that perfectly.
I think everyone should be in church, but I personally don't need it. Oh, okay. Congratulations.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And well, it was funny also to watch kind of the reaction of the people who I was talking with at this meetup. You know, when I said that, their reaction was more or less, yeah, I guess I'm just not there yet. Like, in terms of like, yeah, I can kind of identify with that, you know? And it was really like refreshingly honest. Like they were very honest about it. They were like, yeah, I kind of feel that way about it too, you know? So it was interesting. And it just shows like how much, you know, it shows how much of a difficult position people like you are in, where it's like you're challenged with crafting a message that can speak at the highest levels of complexity and the lowest levels of simplicity as well, you know? So, hats off to people like you.
Most preachers, I think, are almost always preaching to themselves, because I want to preach sermons that I won't be bored with. There's a real selfishness in there. And you know, I have to stop and think, now actually this sermon is for them. The people who are out there, and so, well, that's kind of one side. The other side is, oh, those people out there, this is what they really need to hear. And that doesn't, that pastors who do that, oh, that just gets awful fast. And because everybody just gets a smell of that sanctimonious attitude, and they just don't want to have anything to do with it. But
yeah. Well, and that's kind of the difficulty too, it seems, is that like the other side of that is that people are also very allergic to anybody telling them anybody bringing any kind of moral information from outside of themselves, you know. It kind of goes back to because I mean, and I find this with myself a lot. I spent enough time outside of church and immersed in, you know, the more outside pop culture, where I didn't and, you know, it was definitely a time where I didn't actively identify as a Christian. I didn't not identify as a Christian, but I wasn't embracing it as like, you know, like a foremost part of my identity. And even now I find myself really like, I mean, last week at church, like Pastor Mike gave a Calvinist sermon. I mean, it was like a real stereotypical Calvinist sermon going through the 10 Commandments and like, this is what's moral and this is what's not, let me tell you. And I sat there squirming in my seat the whole time, you know. I'm just like, I know he's right, but I don't like this so much because he's moralizing. And it's like, well, I mean, you can also fairly critique the certain aspects of the delivery, but at the end of the day, I feel like it's probably a part of the secret sacred self inside me that doesn't want to let go of what I really think is the true origin of morality with, you know. so yeah, I think that's part of it too.
Oh, that's very. I remember Neil Plantinga, who was our systematics prof at Calvin Seminary. One of the tidbits that he said, you know, sometimes when you preach sermons, you should just tell people what's wrong. You should say, sometimes you should just be clear. You should say, you know what, adultery, it's wrong.
Wrong.
It really is. And you shouldn't do it. And if you're doing it now, you should stop. You know, instead of, I mean, preachers went, oh, then you'll go the Sermon on the Mount. Well, if you lust, so we can all feel bad about lust. But yeah, that's true. But also adultery, it's wrong. And stop it. You know, there's a value to that.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, when I think about, you know, what Peterson has done, he has found a way to do morality with people and in a very effective way, but also without really necessarily triggering. He's kind of he's clearly triggered the left because, you know, but for a lot of other folks, the danger of that is always self-righteousness, because you can, if you help make, if you, how can I say that? If you encourage a bunch of people in their self-righteousness, you've also lost, because that is so you've got the law, and it's the violation of the law is dangerous, but also the compliance with the law is also spiritually dangerous. And, you know, it's Tertullian and the two sides of the horse. It's Tim Keller does that real well with the prodigal sons. There's the sin of the younger son and the sin of the older son, the older brother. Mm-hmm. So
yeah, exactly.
We're such good sinners. We're so good at it. even when we're following the rules. You know, it's, well, now you see, you and I are really gonna. I talked to so few Calvinists in this little journey of mine that, you know, you and I can really nerd out. Calvinism? What is that? Are you just determinists?
Yeah, exactly. No, I think Peterson has really, what you're getting at there in a sense is really that Peterson has kind of perfected the art of, you could say it this way, I guess. Yeah, Peterson has really perfected the art of laying out, you know, a broad moral framework and allowing people's internal consciences to just convict themselves. It's like they don't need anybody else to really stand out there and preach towards them. You know, he's taken, and that kind of, it's an elimination of what you described there, and that's a power dynamic. It's a power dynamic between the older brother and the younger brother, and the older brother and the prodigal son is mad that the younger brother isn't getting, you know, that essentially the hierarchy is being flipped and flattened through radical grace, right? And that's right. And he's mad about that, you know. And yeah, I mean, Peterson's kind of taken the any social power that the convictor might gain from that. He's kind of taken out of the equation, you know. And I mean that. Well, maybe that's what the church needs to do. Tell me, Paul, what do you think? How would we go about doing that more effectively?
Well, it's so funny because, you know, the proverbial basement dweller. That's part of what my, when I talk to my wife about Jordan Peterson stuff, and the proverbial basement dweller, the guy who is literally living in his mother's basement. In California, we don't have basements, so he's in the house some other place, but he doesn't have a job. He spends his time on YouTube and video games, and it's not like mom hasn't been nagging the crap out of that dude, about how many different things forever. And Jordan Peterson comes along and, thousands of them are like, oh, well, maybe this isn't okay. And maybe I should clean up the basement and not play video games 15 hours a day.
Yeah.
And smoke all this pot and eat all those Cheetos and drain my mother's life worrying about the lostness of her child. Mom's been nagging at him forever.
Yeah.
And then mom might get another attitude like, oh, so I deal with this forever, and this Canadian psychologist comes along, and now you act?
Yeah, it's like, what is it about that, right? I mean, I think a little bit of it is that, like, it's really obvious that Peterson really genuinely wants the best for them, and is able to say that in a way that, like, I mean, I guess there's something probably inherent about it coming from the mother that's not going to work, because it's nagging.
Yes.
There might also be just, like Peterson's better at saying it in a way that makes them, realize it's like, I really do want the best for you. Yeah. And why don't you go make something out of yourself? Because you're pretty pathetic right now, Yeah.
Well, and it's also something that, and this is a liability of my profession. Sometimes the preacher is like the mother. And depending on, how you grew up and where you grew up, the preacher's voice is like the mother's voice. Well, of course you're going to give me crap about, wasting my life. You're the preacher. That's your job. So I'm not going to listen to you.
It's so cynical. And, well, really, though, it's so cynical. Like, people have, like, the baseline presupposition that people take before they walk into a church is that the preacher just wants you to give money to the church, and it's all about the church. And it's like, I understand why they like, hey, fair enough, man. We're not without sin, like.
And there are preachers like that.
Exactly. Turn
they
on the TV
are out there.
Oh, yes.
I could name names. And I would never.
Joel Osteen.
Well, it's easy to pick on him because he's on TV, but that is a real thing, and it's a temptation for preachers not to use people, and it's a continual temptation to love people and not use them. It's basic for all of us, but
yeah, exactly. Well, let's talk about the divide, though, between, we've got these people who we're meeting in our meetups. I think you and I are both having, similar experiences here, and they're pretty comfortable with God number one, the Jungian God, the evolutionary God, the God that emerges from culture from the bottom up. And now they're staring at church, and the problem is, I feel like what a lot of them are trying to do is they're trying to go to church, and this is what we don't want. We don't want to train smart people to go to church and translate all of God in a God number two into God number one. Every word that the preacher says, and this is what Tim was talking about at the SLN meetup the other day, is that, like, you could just walk in and translate every word that the preacher says into Jordan Peterson language. And then, we don't want, like, it doesn't seem to me that that's the goal, because that seems to be, like, to me, that points to a desire to bring it back to a reductive materialism, where it's like, oh, yes, indeed, I can maintain my materialist framework and just look at it with an evolutionary context and see all this stuff is evolutionarily necessary. Because if it's evolutionarily necessary, I can maintain the materialist view of the world and also live in this community, sort of. And it's like, but you're doing mental gymnastics, all day long for it, and it doesn't seem to me that that's the goal. And we should also point out, like, the point of trying to preserve the materialist framework, in my mind, would be that you're also trying to preserve the original problem of the secret sacred self, the idea that the true morality comes from within you. And that seems to be that like, morally speaking, if you want to look at it from, like, a really sociological perspective of what causes a society to adopt good morals versus bad morals, it seems to me that the separation between, like, the origin of the morals from yourself. Like the origin of the morals being whatever it is, it's like whatever it is that's making me do the right thing, it's not me. You know, it's external, you know, and it's not me. That's the point, right? And that gets back to the Jewish idea of, you know, not making a graven image of God and not speaking the name of God, because when you name things and carve things, you're protecting yourself. So if we're trying to avoid that, then we can't let the Jordan Peterson project being a compatibilism between Christianity and pure materialism. So how else do we bridge that gap, I guess, is the question.
Well, so I was having a conversation with Adam at Think Club, and actually Adam and we've talked once on the air, but we swap tweets and emails and offline, and he's terribly fun to talk to. And so he listened to my conversation with Glenn Scrivener from the UK, and he said, well, I've got some insight into, you know, Jordan Peterson's attractiveness. He said, you know, he does everything he does without getting into the supernatural. And I thought, on one hand, it's not totally true.
Yeah.
But there is a degree of truth to that, because obviously, especially for people who are coming over, who Jordan Peterson is rating from the Sam Harris camp, the supernatural, that they're really touchy about the woo. So it's like, you know, if I sent some Deepak Chopra here, I'm out. So
right.
And so that's an issue. That's obviously an issue all the time with church. I've had enough situations where, especially when I first started doing videos, I'd have people just, they'd see my videos in Sacramento. They're into Jordan Peterson, so they're going to stop by church, and you can very quickly tell the disappointment, because I was hoping this would be like going to a Jordan Peterson lecture on the Bible, but it ain't. You know,
exactly, yeah.
The pastor's only going to talk for 30 minutes. Then you got all this music and praying and stuff,
what is that, right?
So, you know, a good number of people go to the meetup and there's no music or praying or even a sermon there at the meetup. There's just conversation. But there are a number of issues, I think, that are involved with that. Part of the materialist vision is a motivated vision, and it's motivated by the lust for domination.
Exactly.
Where we, if I can penetrate the inner workings of the world and know it all the way through, like I can, let's say, know the engine of a Volkswagen Beetle,
mm-hmm.
I can master it. And it is the last chapter of C.S. Lewis's The Abolition of Man. It is the dream of perfect mastery. The problem with it is that very quickly, philosophically, it runs into a problem almost immediately, because, okay, I am mastering it. Okay, what's I?
Right.
You can't master yourself, or, you know, there you have a circularity. So that's one of the issues. I think another issue is the difference between, I might get in trouble for this, the difference between a hooker and a wife. And or maybe I Mud. There's the original Star Trek had an episode, I Mud, where this guy built women for his planet, and they're all, you know, 1965 beautiful, and then, you know, the Enterprise comes along and the dude wants out. Well, why? You've created the Stepford women here, and it's exactly the same problem, in that church is more like a wife than this robot that you have constructed. It's filled with people who are going to be annoying and inconvenient and make selfish demands and occupy your small group for 20 minutes with a tirade about the evils of Halloween. That is what church is about. And people are like, well, I don't want any of that. I just want YouTube. Well, here's the thing about YouTube. YouTube is more like the hooker or the robot or the Stepford wife that you can click on and click off. You master it. being a Christian is being a slave. You are beneath God in the hierarchy. He is
Exactly.
your master, and he tells you what to do.
Yeah.
And right there is the entire story of Christianity, because we don't like that arrangement. We want to be on the top of the hierarchy. We think we want that, but it, Mud wanted off the planet with his Stepford wives. So, and so then when you get into church, it's like, what am I gonna? The sermon was boring today.
Oh
The
yeah.
worship leader picked crappy music. I have to sit by, and actually C.S. Lewis writes about this dynamic a lot, because talk about I'm smarter than everyone at church. C.S. Lewis was smarter than everyone at church.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah.
And he had to learn to go and he writes about it quite a bit actually in Screw Tape Letters, to go and listen to, and he hated the music. And I mean, for C.S. Lewis, I mean, church must have been horrible, but he had to grow in Christian maturity to love it. I remember a great saint when I was in seminary. I was going to church, and a seminarian came and preached at our church, and it was awful. And I sat there and I just thought, oh, this is horrible. And this woman that I knew, she was an older woman and she was a saint. I remember her saying, wow, I really got a lot out of that message. And I thought, what? That was here, little 23-year-old me who had a couple of preaching classes, so full of myself, could say everything that was wrong with that sermon. But this saint could listen, could sift through this pile of banality and come up with a gem and grow spiritually. And when she said that, I thought, that is the difference. That is what sainthood, that is what saints do, and why saints thrive in church. And you're only going to become a saint if you go to this place with annoying people and learn to love them, and even sometimes in places submit to them.
Yeah. Isn't that crazy? Yeah.
So
well, it's crazy because you're really pointing out like it's the paradox of Christianity in a lot of ways. It's like, you have the death and resurrection of Christ, and fundamentally that's a flattening and flipping of the hierarchy. But then our fundamental relationship to God is an establishment and placement in the hierarchy.
That's right.
And that seems to be paradoxical, where people either come at the idea of a narrative and a hierarchy as, it's either fundamentally bad or it's fundamentally good. And well, there you go. Yeah, exactly.
Well, the amazing thing about Christianity is, and I figured this out when I was studying Luke, and when I was reading, it was Joel Green's commentary on the Gospel of Luke, and I began to realize everything in there's all these status things going on. And then when I saw it in the Bible, I started seeing it in the world. And I thought, it's amazing what Jesus does with these status conversations, because on one hand, he's using them all the time, and on the other hand, he's flattening them. With Jesus, you both have a world of status and hierarchies, and you have a world of equality. But figuring out the dynamics between those two things, it's not easy. Jesus is the highest, he becomes the lowest. Then he says to his disciples, no titles among you, you're all brothers and sisters. And it's like, well, how does this work?
Exactly. It's interesting you say that about Luke in particular. Does that play into like, I mean, I've heard it in some of the classes I've taken on theology as well, that Luke, as one of the synoptic gospels, was written very much like with the Gentile audience in mind. Does that kind of play into that as far as, that would make sense.
Well, I think, it was partly the commentary. When I go through a book, I will decide, I might have 4 or 5 commentaries on a particular book of the Bible, and I'll say, okay, but this time when I go through, I'm going to focus on this commentary so that I can really take a deep dive into that one particular author. And that was Joel Green, who taught at Fuller. I don't know if he still does, but he really opened up for me. See, we in this egalitarian society, we're Peterson is dead on right. Our biological systems are attuned to status. But in our society, we've got great status denial that, okay, equality, equality, equality. Well, when you go back into the Roman world, you realize, oh, baby, pecking order.
Yeah.
That all of your interchanges with other people, they're all about status and how you relate to another person. I was just actually yesterday listening to George Marsden did a talk at Brown University, and he was back in the 18th century talking about the fact that hierarchies, the world was full of hierarchies and everybody knew where they were in that. And that was the same as when I dealt with the Haitians. There's no equal people among Haitians. And our culture is weird this way. But we're in denial about it because we all know, I've got 9,000 some subs on YouTube. That means I'm below other people who have more, and I'm above others who have less. And it's true.
Hey, at least you're able to talk with people like me. At 50,000, you're probably out of reach for me, right?
I hate that. I'm such an egalitarian American. I hate that. And people say, oh, I want to talk to you now because someday you won't be able to. And part of me knows that may be the case. That might be true someday. And another part of me hates it.
Yeah.
Because here's the thing. And I always say hierarchies bind and blind, because who can Jordan Peterson talk to now? And it's not even that he can't reach down and pick up one of us underlings and condescend and talk to us. It's that he in some ways can't. He's got to deal with these things. Yeah, he can talk, but it's that you don't get rid of the status. In that way, all the postmoderns and some of their critiques, there's validity to it. They're pointing at truths out there. But it's and that's what I love about Jesus, because He's the king of the world. He's the son of God. And he walks into a village and, he's at the well and his disciples go for food. And the Samaritan woman comes down and has a conversation with her in John 4. And I just think, gosh, that's beautiful.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, I wanted to also bring up this theme that you talk about a lot, which is you talk about how Jordan Peterson is coming at things from the this is kind of a little bit of a turn in a different direction, but you're talking about how this actually fits pretty well now that I think about it. Jordan Peterson's coming at things from the bottom up, right? He's looking at Jung, he's looking at Darwin, he's looking at all these psychological types, and so he's making a case from the bottom up. Why can't things come from the bottom up and the top down? Because I see verses like this, and you can tear my exegesis to part here, but you see these verses that talk about how the law is written on people's hearts, and that the rocks cry out his name, and all these things about how it's general revelation and specific revelation, right? And given these themes, I mean, is it surprising really that Jordan Peterson's bottom-up case would actually make a pretty darn good case for Christianity as well as the top-down case for it? I mean, I struggle with this idea that it's really incompatible, and I think this is actually where Jonathan and Matthew Pageau might be useful, right? When you get to the bottom of something, it the extremes are closer than the middle. Once you get to the bottom, it flips and goes to the top.
Yep.
And I find myself thinking about that. I'm like, it would totally make sense that if you dig down deep enough into something, the opposite becomes true. When you dig down deep into quantum physics and you realize that the world has fundamental absurdity, and you go, oh, I actually know nothing about the world, and I'm incapable of knowing anything about the world because of my a priori interpretive structure. So sure, resurrection. Yep, I can make that leap of faith. Yep. All of a sudden, the scale of what kind of decision you're making to find meaning in life is a lot different. It becomes clear to you how few choices you have. And that's the thing is we really don't have a lot of choices about what path we're going to go. And it seems to me the deeper you dig, the more clear it is. It's meaninglessness and nihilism, or the church.
True. It's true.
At least that's where I ended up.
That's in that Tim Keller 2015 Faith Angle Forum, that mushy middle. That's polarization. They're squeezing it out and they're going one to the other. The reason it's a cultural bias blindness that gives us difficulty from the top down. And actually Keller in that same talk talks about that. And you see it all the time. Africans don't have a problem with top down. Hispanics often don't have a problem with top down. People all over the world don't have a problem with top down. We have a problem with top down. Now we think of ourselves as top of the heap because we're a superpower and we have cell phones and we have technology. And so that's how we think of ourselves. And we look at other people and say, well, you believe in spirits and stuff. And actually later in that same talk, Tim Keller will talk about Africans where, people are like, well, the Christianity is the white man's religion, but Africans are like, no, actually Christianity gets us a lot better than you secularists, because you secularists hear us dealing with the spirit world and thinking, you're a bunch of ignoramuses who don't know anything. It's our cultural blindness. It's our cultural biases that blind us.
It's so funny you say that. It's exactly right. I mean, our church, we were just going through the membership course and stuff, and they had us take, one of those cheesy little spiritual gifts summaries. And I mean, it's not cheesy. It's useful. But I did, the whole time I was doing it, I was like, this isn't psychometrically valid. And not only that, I scored
profile.
not only that, but the average score I had was like a 15 in most categories or something like that, which is right in the middle between 15 and 30. And on prophecy, I scored 7, like the lowest you can possibly score. And it just goes to show, I think of the idea of getting a message from God. Someone tells me they have a message from God for me, and I go, okay. Alrighty then. It's like, it's a tough thing to deal with, because how do you reconcile this when it seems so in conflict? But at the same time, it's like we're looking at it from such a bottom-up, modernist, materialist way of analyzing the world and seeing it as a space for objects that can be nicely quantified. And it's like, I think once you stop really doing that and realizing it's kind of both and, then or realizing that science is actually nested with it's a tool that's nested within a form for action, and that's and biology shows that, and reinforces that, then you can start to see the utility of some of these things.
And that's been I think that's a big part of the reason Peterson has been bread pilling people, because he better than most has been able to expose the ways in which our materialist bias isn't even scientifically valid. And actually, that's been known since early in the 20th century, but there's always a lag in these things.
Yeah.
And so, as the last little clip I had with Tim Keller, I mean, philosophically, most of this stuff, Sam Harris, it just doesn't have a leg to stand on.
Yeah.
But exactly. Popularly, he's still getting traction in the culture, which is ironically the inverse of what he says about Christians. But they're receding. It's like, no, Sam, it's the winds of change are not really blowing your way. Sorry.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's like, being created in the image of God, we come to see it's like we come to see our power to, I'm just looking at something I kind of wrote to myself was salient to it, but we get obsessed with our own power to put things in order, and when we expect bedrock finality at the bottom, we instead encounter the endless void, and it's only then we begin to understand our need for a creator. Yeah. And I think a lot of Peterson's folks are kind of in the process of going through that and realizing what that is and struggling with what the implications are. And so I guess this brings us back to our initial question, like, what can we as the church be doing to better serve these people, to bring them into the fold of the church? We've got so many barriers, like our language, we've got our rituals, like what in the world, like worship, like what exactly are we doing when we worship? Like, probably actually be a good idea to clarify that so we can actually tell them what we're doing. I mean, I play on worship band, even at this new church that I'm at.
Yeah.
And it's like, I can't really tell you what we're doing. We're just singing some songs, man, and it's like, and we feel great about it. And we're worshiping. Like, what do you mean? What are we doing? It's like, it's hard to jump over those gaps. And I don't know, every once in a while I think I should just call Paul and we should just go plant a church together. We should just go plant a new church. What do you think, Paul? You want to go plant a church?
I just talked to a guy in Ireland, and he's like, "There's no Christian Reformed church here." I thought, I could go to Ireland. I'll plant it in Ireland, and Enda will love it, and he'll solve his problem. But his whole family will be ticked off because they won't be going to the Catholic Church. But no, and the irony, part of what's been fascinating about the Peterson thing is, number one, even he doesn't fully know what he's doing. So here you got a guy who doesn't go to church, who a whole bunch of people are starting to go to church because of him. And he's not really saying, go to church. He's saying, clean your room. And the application has been, I'll clean my room, but then maybe I'll think about that. Number two, a big, and part of this is Jonathan Peugeot's influence. A number of people that I've talked to, they're going to the Orthodox Church. And
I've encountered that as well. Yeah.
And okay, why? Well, they don't know. And we can kind of say, well, maybe it's this or this or this or this, but something's going on there. There's real reasons for it. And you go to the Orthodox Church, are they necessarily going to explain this in all materialist concepts or psychological concepts to people? Jonathan Peugeot says, I don't pay any attention to Jungian archetypes. I read church fathers. It's like, well, that's interesting.
Yeah.
And it's not a criticism on my part. It's just the fact that the Orthodox Church, they've got their program. They've been working it for 2,000 years. They're not going to change because of Jordan Peterson or you. And
exactly.
So now we Protestants, we're like,
we're all over the place.
We're all over the place. And we're like, I got to be relevant. So,
let's make a church for you. And
that's right. Kick out the organ, bring in the guitar and the smoke machine. And
exactly.
And so, well, now we got to explain what we're doing in this worship service. But then we stop and think, well, what are we doing in this worship service?
Exactly. And it's just probably the weakness of Protestantism and evangelicals. Yeah, exactly.
No, that's right. That's right. But at the same time, it also, part of my concern, so when I was talking to, and on Twitter, I was going on with Esther and Glenn a bit about, or Esther kind of, this thing that's really gnawing at me, and how Jordan Peterson has exposed the poverty of the church to connect and reach out to this particular group of people. Esther got a little defensive for pastors and churches. It's like, I'm the pastor, I'm the church. Why are you getting defensive for us? But I don't want to. Thousands and millions of people are finding Christ in churches all the time. That's always going on. And sometimes when I talk, it makes people think like churches are all dying all over the place, and that isn't true. And it's part of the reason I wanted to play at least part of that Tim Keller Faith Angle Forum thing, because the church continues to do its work. People continue to find new life in Christ through the church, through many, many different kinds of churches. And even though in Western Europe and the United States, this church is struggling, in many other places in the world, the church is growing by leaps and bounds. So it is not the case that the church is knocked out of the game. But what Jordan Peterson has done is exposed, I think, some of what I listened to a video today from an atheist, a celebrity atheist, a kind of a B-level one on YouTube. And he made the point, he said, why evangelists, why apologists get no traction with me? And the 11-minute video could have been brought down into one sentence, which was, they don't listen. Christians don't listen. It's true. Oh, here's all the things you need to do. Christians don't listen. You sit down with someone and listen and listen and listen. And sometimes people just talk themselves. But Jordan Peterson says listening is the most powerful thing. Why? Because we think out loud.
Mm.
And you learn that as a pastor, that people come into my office and, Pastor, I have these questions. And they talk and they talk and they talk and they talk and just listen. And they leave with their answers. I didn't give them any.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of it's funny. I think that dynamic is true in both directions. You know, like I think a lot of times we're really afraid, you know, because we see ideas and knowledge as these colonizing things that they are. And we're afraid that if we really listen to the atheists and their points and their questions, then, you know, then our brains will be colonized with the, you know, the spawn of, you know, the devil or whatever, you know. I mean, I say this facetiously, you know, I probably shouldn't joke about that too much, but, you know, it's like, like, oh, the atheism will infect my mind, you know. And it's funny because we criticize Dawkins for calling religion a mind virus, you know, and kind of seeing it as the same thing where it's like, you know, the people who don't want, you know, religion to be in public spaces at all, they're like, they see it as this thing that will infect things. It's like, just because it's put out there, it's harming people, you know. And yeah, I mean, exactly. Like, I think at the end of the day, we're afraid to listen because we're not confident enough in our own faith and our own beliefs. You know, we don't have enough reasons, or we're afraid we don't see a clear enough path to how those questions, even though they might shake us a little bit, might lead us to greater strength. And we're not confident to take that path. And I think that's where a lot of so many churches become so insular and internally focused, is like, well, we don't have to deal with any of these questions because we all believe in Jesus and we don't have to justify it, you know. And then, and yeah, I mean, there you go. That's not a focus on Christ. That's a focus on, that's a focus inward, you know. So that's kind of the difficulty.
That's very right. If I can keep those questions out there, I don't have to deal with them. And we will use punishment and enforcement and compliance to make sure that nobody raises them here. Doesn't work, especially in this internet age.
Yeah, exactly. Let's see. I was sorry, just trying to look for another piece of paper here. Yeah. So okay. So the problem is we don't want to create necessarily just another church for them, because I think, and the problem with that might be that people might just see right through it. You know, and that might be kind of the problem with the evangelicals and the Protestants, is that, like, you know, the external world sees the church spinning off all these new churches that are meant for specific populations, and they're like, we see what you're doing. You know, you're making a church that you think is going to attract me because you want me to go, and all they can focus on at that point, like their main focus is, you want me to show up. You know, and yeah, I mean, I think Peterson is different in that, like, it starts with not, you want me to show up. It starts with, I want you to be better, you know. And it starts with, in some paradoxical sense, where it's like Peterson's not listening, but it's, in some sense, the best thing to do is to listen, you know, and you need someone who's actually going to listen, you know. And a lot of these meetups have started that way, you know, where, like, your meetup started with, well, I'd like to listen, and you're really good at listening, clearly. But it's like you said in a couple of videos ago, you know, well, what would happen if more people showed up to your meetup than went to church, right? And it's like, well, what in the world would happen if, like, more people showed up, if, like, you know, 50 people showed up to our meetups and said, well, we should start a church. And it's like, well, I mean, immediately I'm like, problem, you're not Christians. So 50 non-Christians who don't know, like, 50 non-Christians who have no experience with church can't just start a church. Like, you know, you need a core membership. But, like, at the same time, it's like, I mean, I feel like we'd have to do something with that. Like, you know, and I'm sitting here like, what would that look like? And as I sit here, you know, and I continue to, you know, contemplate a call to ministry, it's like, this is really fun. Like, I love scheduling meetups, thinking, who's going to show up? What kind of crazy things are they going to say? I'm going to get to talk to them and, like, hear what they say. And maybe I get to talk back a little bit, and we get to have a great conversation that's, like, super honest and really, like, even. And it's like, it's not obvious to me that I could become a pastor and, like, go to a church and have anything close to the same conversation, you know? And I'm kind of like, how in the world do I get some sort of ministry opportunity where I don't have to introduce myself as a pastor because that would like, I feel like people just shut down. They're like, oh, you're the pastor. You are going to moralize. You're going to judge. You're going to pontificate. You're not here to listen. And so that's kind of where I am. Like, yeah.
That,
what do I do?
That bias about pastors is deep in Christians. I don't find it as deep in others.
Really?
That was one of the big surprises I've had in this journey. That, I mean, there was one individual who doesn't go to church, and he says, "Oh, I know why your channel took off. It's because you're a pastor." I'm like, well, that should be why my channel didn't take off. He says, you have an investment in this that means that there's a degree of consequence to you talking about this that there isn't for other people. And I thought, well, that's true. I as a Protestant, my answer to the question of the buckos and church is partly, if this wave is big enough and endures enough, they will create their own church. Now, there's some heresy in that, which I'm very well aware of, that especially the sacramental traditions, the Roman Catholics and the Orthodox will key in on. But this is, in fact, what happens in the world and how the church grows. So I've used this example before. So Wycliffe translator goes off into some jungle and, somehow gets the people to start to trust him, and creates a written language for them, translates the Bible into them, gives them the Bible, and these people who know absolutely nothing start what? What is it that they start?
Yeah.
And I'm thinking about missiologist Roland Allen. When I was, so I was a missionary in the Dominican Republic, and I had a seminary education. I'm there, and it wasn't a few months that I'm there, and I'm thinking, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't even know what I should want to do. And somewhere along the line, I heard a little bit about Roland Allen, who was a late 19th, early 20th century missionary. He's got some tiny little books, and I read those books, and I thought, oh, because Roland Allen noticed that he had these mission stations he was supposed to visit, and then there was always turmoil and stuff that would happen. And he had the disturbing realization that the churches he didn't visit were doing better than the ones he did.
Oh, okay. That's really interesting.
That is really interesting. Well, and then he had to ask himself, why?
Yeah.
What am I doing to muck up the work of God? This is the story of modern missions, that, like in China and Africa, when the Chinese and the Africans finally were ready to tell the Europeans, take a hike. We're sick of you picking and choosing, and it was the churches, once they got the missionaries out of the way, those churches grew, and they had heresy and they had corruption and they had huge problems.
Yeah.
But off it went. And it'll be the same with this crowd, I'm sure, if it gets big enough. Some will go Roman Catholic, some will go Orthodox, but there'll be a church of the buckos, and they'll have their heresies, and it'll be a mess, but God will do something with it.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, Jordan Peterson might say you have to believe in the power of the logos, huh?
Well, if you in this Christian business, if you don't trust God, what else do you have?
Yeah.
Isn't that the thing?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you already made the statement that you truly believe that whatever it is that's good that you're doing, or whatever it is that's orienting you towards the good, or whatever the good is that you're oriented towards, it's not you. You already said that. So you're placing yourself in a hierarchy below that thing that's outside of you. So then, what follows from that? What really follows from that? And I think, like, if you don't trust that, then, well, I think a little bit of your sacred self is showing.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
That I am God. Oh, okay. Well, you're not. You're a lousy God.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
Well, we have 5 more minutes. I have another talk after you. So anything on your list you definitely wanted to hit?
I think we almost went through every single thing. It's so funny because
really?
I have so many things, but it's funny to me how many of these concepts had no differences between them, because we had hit like 4 of them at once. And I'm like, well, I think that's great. That's awesome. So I think we're good. We covered almost everything. Yeah.
Oh, wonderful. Well, wonderful. I'm glad you signed up, and I'm glad we did this. This was good. And
Yeah, thanks a lot for taking the time. You know, I was kind of worried, you know, when you came up with your Patreon thing, and I'm like, oh no, he's getting bigger. Am I ever gonna get to talk to him? We'll see. His schedule's probably totally like frozen. It's like, no, you plenty of time.
it's getting tighter.
Yeah,
you know,
yeah,
it is, and
yeah,
I have such. I don't want it to, you know, it's so bad because I should be a YouTuber and I want to get up to 15,000. I want to get up to 20,000. I want to get 100,000 subs. But part of me is like, yeah, but then I won't get to talk to Nathan, and I won't get to talk to Enda, and I won't get to talk to Topher, and I can't talk to Topher twice. And so,
although, you know, he was really interesting to talk to, though.
I got to talk to him again.
Faster,
yeah.
I think I talked faster than Ben Shapiro. Oh my God.
I know.
Yeah, I was like, whoa.
Like, whoa.
Seriously, I was like, I saw you. You were like the wind of his words was like
That's
coming.
right.
You were like back in your seat, like, oh my goodness, this guy's got so much to say. Oh, it was great. It was fabulously entertaining, though. Anyway, Paul, thank you so much for taking the time. I'm totally looking forward to the rest of the SLN stuff. And
shall I just consider this a yes on posting this, or do you want to look at it?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, no, go for it. I mean, well, so I should clarify a little disclaimer. The person who I was talking about, who talked about Halloween to the thing, just like off chance, like someone who knows him watches this or something like that, it wasn't 20 minutes. It was like 5 minutes. It was no big deal. It was fine. But, you know, just for illustrations. Like
Stories are better embellished often.
Exactly. Yeah.
All right, Nathan.
All right. Thanks a lot, Paul. Good luck with your next conversation.
All right. Thanks.
All right.
Bye-bye.
We'll see you again.